Good evening. My name is Nicole Clark. I will be presenting my final presentation for Business 343. The case study that I have decided to research is the grievance case study 1, is an adopted mother entitled to maternity leave. Next slide, please. The role that I will be representing in this case will be legal counsel, and then we will also be discussing who is the employee, where do they work, how long have they been with this particular company, what position are they in, a bargaining unit, and then a grievance file due to a CBA violation, which is a collective bargaining agreement violation. Next slide, please. So the employee that we would be discussing is Carol Fern. Carol is actually employed with Bainbridge Bureau. She has worked for Bainbridge Bureau for 18 years. The current position that she holds with Bainbridge is a tax clerk. And one important thing to remember, the tax clerk position with Bainbridge Bureau is actually part of the bargaining unit of the Local 10 of the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, which is the AFSCME. Next slide. So Carol and her husband actually received news that they would be unable to conceive, or Carol would be unable to conceive. So with this news, they actually decided to start the adoption process. On April the 22nd, Carol and her husband received news that a 3-month-old baby girl was ready to be adopted. However, due to Carol's position, a tax clerk position at Bainbridge, and it being the month of April, which is a busy tax month for Bainbridge, Carol decided to see if she could postpone the adoption until the month of April was finished. So the adoption agency actually agreed, and they postponed the adoption actually out until May the 2nd. Next slide, please. So on April the 27th, Carol requested 2 weeks of paid vacation. That would be from May the 2nd through May the 17th. Carol was expected to return to work on May 18th. However, on May 17th, Carol contacted Bainbridge Bureau and requested a 6-month unpaid maternity leave. This particular request was sent to the Bainbridge Bureau Council for approval. The request was reviewed by the council, and by a 4-3 vote, it was actually rejected. Instead, Carol was offered 2 successive 90-day unpaid leaves of absence, which does amount to 6 months. However, that is not a 6-month unpaid maternity leave. So on June 1st, Carol actually filed a grievance due to her unpaid maternity leave being rejected. Next slide, please. So as a legal counsel representing this case, there are a few things while I have been brought in to review this case, and one was the bargaining unit for the tax clerk position, and then due to the violation of the collective bargaining agreement. So we will notice in Article 10 of leave of absence section, which is 4A, it does discuss unpaid leaves. One is for reasonable purpose, and then there's another section for maternity leave. Under maternity leave, we will notice that maternity leaves are not to exceed 6 months. However, if an employee does request unpaid maternity leave for 6 months, that request is to be granted under the Article 10 leave of absence section. So a couple things that we will look at as well is what is actually what defines maternity, and then another act that Carol was actually covered under. So maternity is defined as the quality of state of being a mother, being or providing care during, immediately before, and after childbirth. And then maternity leave is the effective period close to and including childbirth. Family Medical Leave Act of 1993 covers employees that need to go out on a personal leave of absence, either for their self, for a spouse or immediate family member, or to care for or a birth of a child or adoption or a foster child. So there are certain qualifications that an employee must meet to be eligible for FMLA. One is the employee has had to work for the employer for 12 months. And then the second thing is the employee must have worked 1,250 hours within that 12 months of when the leave is requested. Now, looking back at Carol's history, we will see that Carol has actually worked for Bainbridge for 18 years, and she is a full-time employee, so we know that her 1,250 hours have been met, so she should be eligible for this Family Medical Leave Act of 1993 as well. Next slide. So my plan of action, due to the collective bargaining agreement being violated, there are a couple things that I would request that Bainbridge Bureau do for Carol Fern. The first would be Bainbridge Bureau must award Carol Fern 6 months of maternity leave. My second request would be due to the CBA violation, which is the collective bargaining agreement violation, I ask that Bainbridge Bureau award paid maternity leave to Mrs. Fern. And lastly, if Mrs. Fern feels that the 6-month paid maternity leave was not long enough due to the rejection of her first request, then I ask that Bainbridge Bureau actually request another unpaid 6 months of maternity leave to Mrs. Fern. So in conclusion, I do feel that Mrs. Fern, her unpaid maternity leave should have been granted because that is what the Article 10 leave of absence section states, that if an employee does request 6 months of unpaid maternity leave, that it should be requested. And as we see, Bainbridge Bureau failed to do that. They actually rejected that request. So that is why they are actually in violation of the collective bargaining agreement. And then my final two slides are my references.